The phone buzzed on Martin's desk. He glanced at the screen, his heart sinking as he read the urgent email from the bank. "This can't be happening," he muttered under his breath. The empire he had spent years building was now teetering on the edge. Stock prices were plummeting, and the latest numbers were showing a terrifying trend. "We're heading into a financial storm," he thought, realizing the world he had known was about to shatter. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he prepared to make the call he knew would change everything. But when his assistant entered, her face ashen, the moment hit home. The crisis was real. "Martin, they're saying the investments are void. You're not getting the loan," she said softly. He felt a chill crawl down his spine. His empire was crumbling, and he was losing everything. Martin walked to the window, his reflection staring back at him like a ghost of the man he used to be. The sound of his phone buzzing on the desk echoed in the empty room. He picked it up, reading a new message. "The deal's off. They've pulled out." His breath hitched. The investors had abandoned him. The last thread of hope severed in an instant. He let the phone fall onto the desk, his hands trembling. The empire he had built with sweat and tears was slipping through his fingers. The consequences were far-reaching. His family, his employees, and everything he had worked for was on the brink of collapse. As the weight of it all pressed down on him, he realized he was on his own. The door creaked open, and his assistant stepped inside once more, her face pale. "Martin, the bank called," she whispered. "They're taking everything." Martin stood in the center of the boardroom, the weight of everyone's gaze on him. The walls seemed to close in, and the air felt thick with tension. His business partner, Derek, stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "This was supposed to be our big break," Derek said, his voice calm but cutting. "How could you let it all fall apart?" Martin's jaw tightened. "I didn't let anything happen," he replied, his voice cracking despite his efforts to stay strong. "You were supposed to help. We were in this together." Derek's eyes narrowed. "I never promised you anything. You're on your own now, Martin. This is your mess to fix." The room fell silent. Martin's mind raced as he tried to process Derek's betrayal. He had trusted him like a brother, but now it was clear. He had been playing a game of his own, and Martin had been nothing more than a pawn. As the days passed, Martin's world seemed to grow darker. The phone calls from creditors became more frequent, the emails piling up with ominous warnings. He barely slept, consumed by anxiety and guilt. One afternoon, his sister, Clara, visited his office, her face a mask of concern. "You can't keep doing this," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You need help. You're pushing everyone away." Martin shook his head, unable to meet her eyes. "I can't ask for help, Clara. It's my mess, and I have to fix it. I can't let anyone else get caught in it." Clara sighed, stepping closer. "You don't have to do this alone. You've always been the strong one. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is ask for help." Her words hung in the air, but Martin felt as though they were a distant echo. He wasn't ready to face the reality of it all, not yet. The days blurred together as the financial strain became too much to bear. Martin found himself at a crossroads. His last hope was an emergency loan from a potential investor, but the terms were brutal. He sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the documents, his hands shaking. Clara entered the room, noticing the tension in his posture. "What is it?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Martin looked up, his face pale. "It's either this or we lose everything," he said quietly. "I have to sign this, but it feels like I'm selling my soul." Clara sat beside him, placing her hand over his. "You're not alone in this, Martin. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Martin's heart sank. He had never wanted this for her, to be dragged into his mess. But she was right. There was no way out but forward, no matter how uncertain the path ahead was. The night was silent, but the weight of the decision still pressed heavily on Martin's chest. He hadn't expected it to be easy, but after his conversation with Clara, everything had changed. The reality of what he was facing began to hit harder than ever. Sitting alone in his office, the city lights outside reflected on his desk, creating a sense of isolation. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Thomas Graves. "Time's running out, Martin. You can't back out now." But was he really out of options? Martin picked up the phone, eyes scanning the screen, his mind racing. He wasn't sure if this deal was his lifeline or a trap. The idea of failing was worse than the idea of betrayal, but which one would leave him in ruin? Martin didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The words from Clara echoed in his mind. This deal is too good to be true. He paced the floor, trying to piece together the information. Was it possible that Thomas was playing him all along? If Clara was right about the shady dealings, Martin might be walking right into a trap. But where else could he turn? His debts were mounting, and every decision seemed to make things worse. He needed answers, something concrete to hold on to. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Clara entered, her face serious. "I found something," she said. "It's worse than we thought. Thomas is connected to a much bigger scheme than we realized." Martin's heart sank. "What do you mean?" Clara handed him a file. Inside was a network of names, financial statements, and hidden transactions. It was all there, pointing to a massive conspiracy. The pieces began to fall into place, and Martin's stomach turned. This wasn't just about a bad deal. This was about a conspiracy that stretched far beyond anything he had imagined. Thomas Graves wasn't just a financier. He was the architect of a financial web that entrapped everyone who crossed his path. Martin's hands shook as he flipped through the papers. "This goes way back," he muttered. Clara leaned over his shoulder, reading the documents. "It's all here. He's been pulling the strings for years." Martin slammed the papers down, his frustration boiling over. "I can't let this happen. I can't let him destroy everything I've worked for." Clara looked at him, her face a mix of sympathy and resolve. "We need to expose him, but it's going to get ugly. Are you ready for this?" The following day, Martin made a call that could change everything. He was going to meet with the whistleblower who had uncovered the evidence linking Thomas Graves to the massive financial fraud. This wasn't just about saving his business anymore. It was about justice. He arranged to meet the informant in a quiet, secluded cafe. As Martin entered, he spotted the man immediately, a nervous-looking man in his early 40s, wearing a wrinkled suit and carrying a small briefcase. Martin sat down across from him. "I hope this information is worth the risk," Martin said, his voice low and steady. The man nodded. "I've got everything you need, but you need to be careful. Thomas Graves is a dangerous man. If he finds out I'm involved, it won't end well for either of us." Martin's pulse quickened. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. After the meeting, Martin returned to his office, the evidence in hand. He now had proof of Thomas Graves' involvement in a series of fraudulent financial transactions. But as Martin looked at the documents, he realized something. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was personal. Thomas had ruined lives, and now, Martin had the power to stop him. But at what cost? He sat back in his chair, the weight of the decision settling in. I can't just expose him, Martin thought. I have to destroy his empire. But was he prepared to go that far? The risk was enormous. If he was wrong, everything he had built would crumble, and he would be left with nothing. The next step would determine everything. The clock ticked on, and Martin couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every day his empire grew shakier, and the weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily on his mind. He had the proof now, but exposing it meant taking on a financial giant, one who had never been challenged before. His phone buzzed again, and it was Thomas. A simple text. "We need to talk." The ominous message sent a chill down his spine. Martin stared at the screen, contemplating his next move. If he met with Thomas, the stakes would escalate. If he didn't, it might cost him everything. "It's time to face him," Martin muttered to himself. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was a battle for his future. Meeting Thomas was inevitable. The next morning, Martin found himself in a luxurious boardroom, staring across the table at his adversary. Thomas was as composed as ever, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his smile cold and calculating. "I'm glad we could meet, Martin," Thomas said, his voice smooth, yet carrying an edge. "I've been hearing rumors. I trust you're not considering any rash decisions." Martin's hands clenched beneath the table. "You don't scare me, Thomas," he replied, trying to mask the fear creeping up inside him. "But I know what you've been doing. And it ends now." The tension in the room thickened as Thomas's smile faded. He leaned forward, his gaze hardening. "You think you can take me down with a few papers?" Thomas's voice was low, dangerous. "I've built an empire. You'll need more than that." After the confrontation, Martin knew the real fight was just beginning. Thomas had made it clear he wasn't going down without a fight. As Martin walked back to his car, he felt a sense of dread settle in. The weight of the evidence, the decisions ahead, and the looming threat from Thomas all seemed to blur together. The only thing keeping him going was the need for justice, but he knew that in this world, justice wasn't guaranteed. He could expose Thomas, but at what cost? As he sat in his car, staring out the windshield, a message pinged on his phone. Clara had sent something. It was a video Thomas caught on tape, making a deal with an offshore account. This was the smoking gun. This could bring him down, but it also meant risking everything. Martin took a deep breath. "It's time to act," he whispered to himself. The decision was made. Martin couldn't afford to wait any longer. He set up a meeting with the press, ready to expose Thomas and the financial empire built on lies. But as he prepared for the confrontation, doubt crept in. Could he really pull this off? The weight of the potential fallout was overwhelming. His reputation, his business, everything could come crashing down. But there was no turning back now. At the press conference, Martin stood before the cameras, Clara by his side. "Today I'm exposing the truth. What Thomas Graves has built is a house of cards, and it's time it all came down." As Martin spoke, he could feel the eyes of the world on him, waiting for the next step. But he knew that no matter the outcome, his life would never be the same. The aftermath was chaotic. The media exploded with stories of the financial collapse, and Thomas's empire began to crumble. But Martin couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. While he had exposed the truth, he knew that the fight wasn't over. Thomas would strike back, and Martin would have to be ready. He spent the next few days preparing for the inevitable retaliation. In the quiet of his office, surrounded by the chaos of the outside world, Martin stared at the files spread before him. "It's not over," he said softly. "But I'm not backing down." The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, Martin felt in control again. He had the upper hand, but it wasn't going to be easy. The pressure was mounting. Martin could feel it in every phone call, every message, every knock on his door. The media was relentless, the public divided. But in the quiet of his office, Martin had only one thing on his mind: his next move. Thomas, with his vast resources, wasn't going to just disappear. Martin knew he needed to strike fast before the retaliation began. But there were still loose ends. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, more hidden beneath the surface. As he examined the documents Clara had sent him, he noticed something odd. A name, one he didn't recognize, connected to several key financial transactions. The mystery deepened. "Who is this?" Martin whispered to himself. He had to find out. Determined to find answers, Martin began tracking down the name he'd uncovered. It wasn't easy. The person behind it seemed to be a ghost, with no traceable history. But Martin wasn't going to stop. Days turned into nights as he dug deeper, reaching out to anyone who might know something, anyone who could shed light on this shadowy figure. Finally, a breakthrough came when he learned that the person behind the name was a former business associate of Thomas, someone who had been involved in a series of controversial deals. The revelation sent a chill down Martin's spine. This was bigger than he'd imagined. The betrayal went deeper than just Thomas. The whole system had been rigged from the start. "I'm going to bring this down," Martin said, his voice filled with resolve. The more Martin uncovered, the more he realized how deep the conspiracy ran. This wasn't just about bad investments or shady deals. This was about power, a network of influential people who had been pulling the strings for years. Martin's sense of betrayal grew stronger as he connected the dots. He had trusted Thomas, but Thomas was just a pawn in a much larger game. The realization hit him hard. He had been played, manipulated, and used. The anger surged within him. He had been a part of this world, and now it was time to fight back. Martin's phone buzzed with another message. Clara wanted to meet. He knew this was the turning point. He had to face the reality of what he was up against. "I can't back down now," he muttered to himself. The meeting with Clara was set. As Martin walked into the dimly lit cafe, he found her waiting at a corner booth. Her face was pale, a far cry from the confident woman who had been by his side through this ordeal. As she looked up, there was a sense of urgency in her eyes. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've found something you need to see." She slid a folder across the table. Inside, Martin found a series of documents detailing illicit financial transactions that linked Thomas to several high-profile individuals. "This could bring them all down," Clara said. But, as Martin scanned the papers, he realized something even more shocking. Clara herself was implicated in one of the deals. His heart sank. "Clara, what have you done?" Martin was torn. The betrayal was deeper than he had ever imagined. Clara had been an ally, but now he wasn't sure what to believe. The documents she had given him could change everything, but what if they were a trap? What if Clara had played him just as Thomas had? As he walked back to his car, his mind raced. The stakes had been raised, and the fight had become personal. He could no longer trust anyone, not even Clara. But if he exposed her, he would lose his last ally. "I can't keep second-guessing myself," Martin thought. He had come too far. He had to decide, fight for the truth or let it all burn. The next morning, Martin couldn't shake the feeling that his entire life was crumbling around him. He sat at his desk, staring at the folder Clara had handed him, trying to make sense of the new revelations. The names, the deals, the shady transactions, it all pointed to one thing: betrayal. But something didn't add up. Martin couldn't believe Clara was involved, not after everything they had been through. Yet, the evidence was right in front of him. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a cryptic text. "If you want to survive, you need to make a choice. Time's running out." The urgency in the message only deepened the weight of his decision. Martin stood up, his mind racing. He had to act, and he had to do it fast. After hours of deliberation, Martin made the decision to meet with Clara. He couldn't trust her fully, but he couldn't do this alone either. She knew too much, and she had to be the key to solving the puzzle. As he arrived at the cafe, Clara was already there, waiting by the window. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously as she glanced up at him. She had changed. The confident woman who once stood beside him was now a broken shell, hiding secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to uncover. "You have to help me," she whispered as he sat down. "They're watching me. They know everything." Martin's eyes narrowed. "Who's they?" he asked, his voice cold. Clara leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're not who they seem. Thomas isn't just a businessman. He's a part of something bigger, something dangerous." Martin could feel his heart rate quicken. His suspicions had been right all along. This wasn't just about money. It was about power. Clara continued, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to get involved, but they forced me into it. I thought I could keep my distance, but they know everything about me. About us." Martin's stomach dropped. The stakes had just gotten higher. "What do we do now?" he asked, his tone urgent. Clara hesitated, glancing around the cafe. "We expose them," she said quietly. "It's the only way." Martin spent the next few days assembling the pieces of the puzzle, with Clara's help. The information she provided was invaluable, but it only led to more questions. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Someone was always one step ahead of them, watching their every move. Martin couldn't shake the feeling that they were being manipulated, that they were pawns in a much larger game. The pressure was mounting. The phone calls, the cryptic messages, the unexpected visits. It was all too much. Martin's mind raced as he stared at the documents spread out before him. "We need to act now," he muttered to himself. But as he picked up his phone to call Clara, he hesitated. Something felt off. The trap was closing in. Martin's worst fears were confirmed when the phone call came. It was from an anonymous number. "You've been warned," the voice on the other end said. "Stay away from this. You're digging in places you shouldn't be." The line went dead before Martin could respond. He slammed the phone down, frustration and fear mixing within him. He had been too reckless, too determined. But there was no turning back now. He couldn't let them win. "I'm going to take them down," he said, his voice steady with resolve. The stakes had never been higher. Everything was on the line. The fight was far from over, and the final showdown was about to begin. Martin couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the images of betrayal, manipulation and threats flooded his mind. He had made a decision, but the consequences weighed heavily on him. As the sun began to rise, he knew that the day ahead would change everything. Clara had been right. They had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. He had spent days gathering evidence, building a case against the corporate giants that had ruined his life. He was no longer a pawn in their game. He was playing by his own rules now. With resolve in his eyes, Martin picked up the phone and dialed the number he had been avoiding. "Clara." "It's time," he said, his voice unwavering. Clara met Martin at a cafe, away from prying eyes. They had both changed in the past few days. The weight of the truth had taken its toll. She looked weary but determined. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her voice low. "Once we do this, there's no going back." Martin nodded, his gaze steady. "We've come too far. We can't back down now." Clara hesitated before speaking again. "I've been thinking. There's one more piece we need. A final key to unlock everything." Martin's curiosity piqued. "What is it?" he asked. Clara looked around cautiously before leaning in. "It's Thomas. He's been hiding something. Something big." Martin and Clara spent the next few hours poring over every detail, connecting the final dots. The information they had uncovered was more than just financial malfeasance. It was a conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of power. As Clara revealed the final piece of the puzzle, Thomas's hidden accounts, secret meetings, and under-the-table deals, Martin's blood ran cold. "This is bigger than we thought," he said, barely able to believe what he was hearing. "If we expose this, it could bring down everything." Clara's voice was steady. "We have to. There's no other choice." The weight of their decision hung in the air, but there was no turning back now. They had the power to destroy an empire. But at what cost? Martin sat in his office later that evening, the evidence spread out before him. His mind was racing. The weight of the information he had now was crushing. But there was a strange sense of empowerment as well. He had never been this close to the truth. He could almost taste victory, but it was fleeting. The phone rang, breaking his thoughts. It was an unknown number. He hesitated before picking up. "Mr. Clark," a familiar voice said, "we know what you're planning." Martin's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" he demanded. The voice on the other end was calm, chillingly so. "This isn't a game. Stop now before things get out of hand." The voice on the other end of the line continued, "You don't understand the consequences of your actions. There's more at stake here than your business." Martin's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to mask his fear. The voice chuckled. "That's not important right now. What matters is that you stop digging into things you don't understand. You're playing with fire, and you're going to get burned." The line went dead before Martin could respond. He sat in the dark, the weight of the threat sinking in, but it only strengthened his resolve. He couldn't back down now. Not after everything he'd sacrificed. The following morning, Martin walked into his office, the weight of the last few days hanging heavy on his shoulders. Clara had arrived early, sitting at his desk with a look of resolve. "We can't wait any longer," she said, her voice firm. "It's now or never." Martin nodded, his gaze focused on the papers in front of him. He had already made up his mind. The risk was monumental, but it was the only path left. "I've thought about it all night," he said, "and I'm ready to go through with it." They both knew what this meant. It wasn't just about their careers. It was about exposing a system that had been built on lies and corruption. "Let's do it," he said, more certain than he had ever been. Martin and Clara's plan was set in motion. They gathered the final pieces of evidence: financial records, incriminating emails, recorded conversations, everything that would expose the depth of the corruption they had uncovered. With every document they reviewed, Martin's resolve grew stronger. But as they prepared to send it to the authorities, doubt crept in. "What if we're too late?" Clara asked, her voice filled with anxiety. Martin shook his head. "We can't think like that. We've come this far. The truth has to come out." With one last glance at the stack of papers, he hit send. There was no turning back now. The days following the submission were tense. Martin and Clara waited anxiously, knowing the storm they had unleashed was just beginning. The phone calls from reporters started to flood in, followed by messages from financial analysts. But there was still no word from the authorities. Each unanswered call, each missed email chipped away at Martin's confidence. "What if we've done this for nothing?" he asked one evening, pacing back and forth. Clara looked at him, her face a mask of determination. "We did the right thing. We've exposed the truth. Now we wait." But the silence between them grew louder as the days passed, leaving them both unsure of the outcome. Then, the call came. Martin's heart raced as he picked up the phone, his breath catching in his throat. "Mr. Clark, we've received your submission," the voice on the other end said. Martin's mind reeled. "What happens next?" he asked, barely able to hold his composure. "We've begun the investigation. This will take time," the voice explained, "but you've done the right thing." The line went quiet for a moment, as if the weight of the situation hung between them. "You've just started something much bigger than you realize," the voice added before hanging up. Martin stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, processing the words. The fight was far from over. As the investigation unfolded, the pressure on Martin and Clara intensified. Their names were all over the news, some celebrating their bravery, others questioning their motives. The corporate giants they had exposed were fighting back with everything they had. Legal teams, PR firms, and paid influencers flooded the media with counter-narratives. But Martin stood firm. He had nothing left to lose. Clara, too, had found her strength, standing by him every step of the way. They had uncovered the truth, and now they had to see it through. "This is just the beginning," Martin said, his voice resolute. "We won't let them bury it."